I like being bad.
Ooh, my spider sense is tingling. If you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, what if Venom just wasn't in Spider-Man 3? This is FanScription. Spider-Man 3 is infamous for being one of the most botched sequels in the history of superhero movies. When it came out in 2007, we were in a transitionary phase for comic book films, coming off the critical success of Spider-Man 2 in 2004 and being 1 year shy of the MCU kicking off with Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk. The hype for this film was through the roof. Everyone wanted to see Venom up on the big screen, which I guess is still true. Spider-Man 3 is still the highest grossing Spider-Man film worldwide. It was advertising what we thought we wanted, but what we got wasn't what we expected. I can go into the behind-the-scenes problems, but they're pretty well known at this point. Director Sam Raimi and Sony were clashing about what should be featured in the film, and the result was an overstuffed, strange, and at times baffling third installment. Despite the financial success, Raimi's Spider-Man 4 never came to fruition, and this triggered the first of 2 reboots in 4 years. I have to admit, I was a huge fan of the original film from 2002, and my first published review was for Spider-Man 3 in my high school newspaper, so this trilogy has had an impact on me, and I think it's high time we set things right. For my version of Spider-Man 3, we need something less goofy, a little darker in some ways, and more appropriate. Venom and the Black Suit Saga need their own films, and they were done a massive disservice by not being the sole focus in this movie. So we can save that for another sequel. The focus here will be as it should have been, the culmination of the relationship between Peter, Mary Jane, and Harry, with Sandman tying into the themes of the story. To do this, we really have to overhaul the movie, so there will be significant changes to the scene order and structure. What I'm trying to say is,
we need to take the whole line back to formula.
Back to formula?
The opening of the film pretty much stays the same. Spidey has his trademark narration, and things finally seem to be going well for both Spider-Man and Peter Parker. New York has embraced the mask, and Mary Jane has embraced the man. His relationship with MJ has never been better, and she's doing well for herself, starring in a production on Broadway. Both Peter and Harry attend the same show, which results in a confrontation outside the theater. Harry and Peter haven't spoken in a few years, since the events of Spider-Man 2. Peter has of course tried, but Harry has mostly separated himself from his former friends. Parker pleads with Osborn to give him just one more chance to explain what happened with Norman. In this version, Harry reluctantly gives in and quickly names a place and time before stepping into his limo and driving off. Peter is pleasantly surprised to have maybe made a breakthrough with his best friend. Inside the dressing room, Peter and MJ discuss her performance and the fact that Harry left a large bouquet of flowers for her. She mentions that she often worries about Harry and is very happy to hear he has agreed to meet with Peter. Back at the Osborn home, Harry is seen brooding in his father's Green Goblin lair. He is a much more conflicted character since finding out the truth about Peter and Norman's alter egos. New tech is littered throughout the hideout as Harry spins a vial of the performance enhancer drug in his fingers. We can see the contradictory emotions on his face as he places it back on the rack and closes the lair entrance. Harry! A voice yells, a voice that sounds an awful lot like Harry's father's. This startles him for a moment before seeing Bernard close by. Bernard apologizes for alarming Harry and reminds him it's time to take his pills. Harry thanks his butler and quickly swallows the medication. It's made to be obvious here that Harry is doing his best to get a handle on his mental health. He realizes what Norman became toward the end of his life and does not want to end up the same way. However, he still struggles with his darker impulses. Meeting Peter is a positive step, and Bernard commends him on that. Harry is then left alone, peering at a small framed picture of himself, MJ, and Peter as the large painting of Norman Osborn looms behind. We cut to the scene in the park with MJ and Peter. They're looking up at the stars while laying on a web. After some romantic banter, Peter actually pops the question and proposes to Mary Jane then and there. MJ accepts, and they embrace. We're introduced to Flint Marko the exact same way as in the film. Most of his arc was handled well, and there's no need to adjust it too much. We see that he's an escaped convict who loves his sick daughter and isn't the man people think he is.
Not a bad person. Just had bad luck.
The next day, Peter visits Aunt May and tells her the proposal went off perfectly. He and MJ are getting married. Aunt May is elated for her nephew. This leads to memories of when Peter's Uncle Ben proposed to her. She's so happy that the ring Ben gave to her, Peter gave to MJ, but reminds him,
"A man has to be understanding and put his wife before himself. Can you do that, Peter?"
When asked if Peter has told Harry the good news, he says he's meeting him tomorrow and is hoping to patch things up. From here, we get the creation of the Sandman. Marko gets caught up in the experiment and disintegrates before our eyes. Back at the Daily Bugle, all the stuff with J. Jonah Jameson stays the same. Why? Because J.K. Simmons is perfect, that's why. We can even keep the competing photographer angle to give Peter a little antagonist at work. And yes, it can be Eddie Brock, not played by Topher Grace, who was outworking Pete to get better shots. I really like Topher Grace, and he actually has some good range, but I think casting a more appropriate actor to play the future Venom is crucial to getting that character right. Granted, Brock's role is heavily reduced in this version. We can just use his appearances here as simple setup for future sequels. We cut to Peter nervously waiting in a local diner. Outside, we see a limo pull up and Harry Osborn exit. Peter prepares himself as his former friend enters the establishment. The tension is thick as Harry takes a seat. Peter tries to break that tension by joking that Harry could have picked a less expensive place. Harry does not seem amused. Now remember what Norman's dying wish was.
Peter, don't tell Harry.
Pete has been struggling with this for years, but is prepared to break his promise to save his friendship. As he gets into it, Harry interrupts.
I know, Pete.
You know what?
My dad. I know everything. I know what he became. I know what killed him. And I know it wasn't your fault.
Peter is flabbergasted by Harry's words. Osborn is holding back tears. Harry, I'm sorry for what happened. I never meant...
It's okay, Pete. It's okay.
Things are obviously not just back to normal so quickly, but trying to forgive Peter is a huge positive step for Harry. He can barely maintain eye contact, and their connection is fragile, but it seems like the two might finally be on the same page again. It also helped that Bernard told Harry about Norman's bladder wounds well before this. Peter smiles and is happy to have his friend back. So happy that he mentions there's another reason he wanted to meet with him. Peter tells Harry that he and MJ are getting married, and he wants him to be the best man. Harry is taken aback and doesn't know how to respond. He accidentally knocks over a nearby glass, which leads to everyone in the diner staring at him. Harry can feel the attention he's getting and gets very nervous very fast. He stands up from the table.
Let me think about it. It was good to see you, Pete.
Harry leaves quickly, and Peter is confused by this reaction. He's not sure if he just ruined the reconnection the two seem to share. Back in the limo, Harry is freaking out. He's hearing the Green Goblin laugh and struggles to take out a pill. After a moment, he calms down. While he may have tried his best to accept what happened with Peter and Norman, MJ is another story. His strong feelings for her are still a great source of stress, and hearing that she's marrying his best friend was too much to take in his current state, much less being asked to be the best man at the wedding. MJ getting fired from the play and somewhat humiliated needs to stay in. Her professional life starts to take a downward turn as Peter's life as Spider-Man couldn't be any better. She sees Spider-Man everywhere. Billboards, newspapers, videos in Times Square.
Kids running around with me on their sweaters. It's a big Halloween item.
After just being fired, all of this feels like Peter's success is being rubbed in her face. And it just so happens that same day is Spider-Man's Key to the City ceremony, which MJ is obligated to attend. She is not in a good mindset to handle all the Spidey love at this point, so it makes her feel even worse about her recent failure. We get a very similar scene to the film, but we'll have Bruce Campbell's cameo come here as the man who announces Spider-Man to the crowd. He's hysterical in the restaurant scene, but since I had to cut it, I think he can do just fine in this role too. Meanwhile, Sandman causes his first real disturbance, and this leads to his encounter with Spider-Man, abruptly ending the ceremony. Afterwards, MJ and Peter meet back at his apartment. Peter is still reeling from the Sandman fight and the awkward lunch with Harry, but before he can tell MJ about it, he sees that something's bothering her. Like in the film, she's ashamed to tell him that she was let go from the play, and when she starts to try, Peter attempts to relate to her by comparing her position to his life as Spider-Man, which makes her even more upset. This is her first big professional failure, and she's not taking it well. Peter bringing up Spider-Man exasperates the situation, and she sort of snaps at him. She feels inferior to the love that Spider-Man gets, which makes sense. She's an actress, and people kind of need to like her as a lead for her to keep her job. She also says that sometimes she feels like Peter likes the admiration a little too much. Peter counters by saying he was hated for years before people accepted him, and this leads to an argument that ends in Mary Jane telling Peter she needs a few days to herself. MJ leaves Peter's apartment with him chasing after her. He's stopped by Ursula, who nervously hands him the phone.
Sorry, Pete. They said it's urgent.
Peter reluctantly takes the phone, and someone from the police department says he's needed at the station immediately.
Want to see us in the Chicagoland area? Well, Saturday, June 29th, we're going to be at Hollywood Palms for Walter Benesiak's cinematic opus, The Infinity Trinity. Doors open at 6, there will be a meet and greet beforehand, signing autographs, taking pictures. The screening starts at 7, and there'll be a Q&A to follow. You can get more information as well as seeing the trailer by checking out the link in the description. Hopefully, we'll see you all there.
Downtown, Peter and Aunt May are told by Captain Stacy that the police now believe it was escaped convict Flint Marko that killed Ben Parker. As in the film, Peter is furious at this news. His reunion with Harry seemed to fall apart, MJ just walked out after their fight, and now this has pushed Peter to a very angry place. That night, Spider-Man tracks down Marko through the police scanner, and they have their second battle. This time, Parker is filled with rage knowing that Marko is the man that killed Uncle Ben. There's no black suit needed here. Spider-Man is angry and takes it all out on the Sandman. Instead of washing away and possibly killing him, Marko gets the hell beaten out of him and decides to flee with some of the money he stole. The next day, the scene with Aunt May and Peter takes on a slightly different tone. Peter's angry about Marko escaping him the night before, but masks this by saying he's frustrated that the cops have no leads on where he is. May can tell that Peter is uncharacteristically mad, and we still get her appropriate speech about revenge.
Aunt May, he killed Uncle Ben.
Uncle Ben meant the world to us, but he wouldn't want us living 1 second with revenge in our hearts. It's like a poison. It can take you over before you know it, turn us into something ugly.
Like in the film, MJ is left without someone to lean on because of her fight with Peter. She decides to go out on a limb and reaches out to Harry. Surprisingly, he picks up and she visits the Osborn home. Harry has not been in a great place since the meeting with Peter, and having MJ visit is probably not a good idea, but he can't resist getting to see someone he cares so much about after all this time. They catch up, and MJ tells him about her work situation. Eventually, this leads into Harry's issues, specifically concerning Peter and Norman. Everything gets laid out on the table.
Harry, you're not your father. You can't let him or what he did define you.
I could say the same thing about you.
Remember, Mary Jane has referenced her father several times throughout the films as a great source of sadness and self-hatred. They bond over this, and it leads to Harry leaning in for a kiss. MJ quickly gets her bearings and shuts him down. She leaves, apologizing for the confusion. Harry pleads with her to stay and is completely embarrassed. After she's gone, he snaps. All his frustrations combine, and it's a deadly mix. He hears the laughing again, and before he can take a pill, he sees his father in the mirror. We get just about the same scene with Norman reminding his son that he's taken his eye off the ball. Harry gives in and enters the Goblin Lair to finally take the performance enhancer. Bernard enters too late and arrives in time to see Harry exit the chamber. He's kept in shadow, but we do catch a small glimpse of a new goblin mask amongst familiar evil laughter. That scene where Venom confronts Sandman about teaming up is played out in almost the same way here, but with a glider and a more sinister voice replacing the symbiote. We cut to news coverage of 2 attacks being carried out on New York in separate locations. One is by the Sandman, and the other by a new goblin figure, being dubbed by the press the Hobgoblin. I know, Harry was never the Hobgoblin in the comics or any iteration of the story that I'm aware of, but we have an opportunity to introduce a new design that carries on the Goblin name without that terrible costume James Franco wore in the movie. We can cross the traditional Hobgoblin look with the more armor-based Green Goblin of the first film. If done right, it could be a pretty great design to see on screen. Peter sees what's happening and knows Harry is probably in the new Goblin getup, but can't resist the temptation to take revenge on Flint Marko. So, he goes after the Sandman. Simultaneously, Mary Jane sees the news coverage and also deduces Harry must be the new Goblin. She feels guilty and realizes she might have contributed to pushing Harry's psyche over the edge. She tries to call Peter, but there's no answer, so she heads out in a desperate attempt to appeal to Harry's good side. As Spider-Man engages in another fight with Sandman, Hobgoblin is just causing chaos on the other side of town, burning buildings, blasting cars, and terrorizing the citizens. Captain Stacy and his squad pull up to try and get control of the situation, but they're overwhelmed by Hobgoblin's firepower. MJ finally shows up and gets his attention. It seems like Harry has calmed down. He takes off his mask and gets close to Mary Jane. They share a quiet moment where she tries to remind him of who he is. It seems to have worked, with Harry breaking down and admitting that MJ is right. Captain Stacy is close by, so Harry goes to turn himself in. However, when he gets close, Hobgoblin stabs him with one of these things.
Hate those things!
Mary Jane is horrified, and he flies off with her on his glider. Far from this action, Spider-Man is having an intense battle with Sandman. Their fight has led to a more secluded area farther away from bystanders. Peter starts to mention Ben Parker again, and eventually, just as he did in the first film, emotionally unmasks. He tells Marko Ben was his uncle. This instantly changes Sandman's demeanor, and he stops fighting. We get just about the same scene as in the movie, where Marko spills his guts about his daughter and what really happened the night Ben died. I'm not a huge fan of the "oh whoops, I shot you" thing, but we need that for this story to work. Peter hears his aunt's words once again about revenge turning us into something ugly. It's not easy, but he forgives Marko as the Sandman floats off into the wind. Peter doesn't have much time to soak that interaction in before hearing that Hobgoblin has a hostage on the Brooklyn Bridge. Spider-Man remasks and books it that way. When Spidey arrives, he sees Hobgoblin holding MJ high over the bridge on his glider. Spider-Man makes his way to the top of the bridge so he can talk some sense into Harry. Hobgoblin removes his mask and is obviously full-on crazy. That doesn't stop Mary Jane from trying to appeal to him one more time, though.
Harry, please. There's still time. You can make your own decisions. You don't have to end up like your father.
Harry covers her mouth.
The great thing about MJ is, when you look into her eyes and she's looking back into yours, everything feels not quite normal. Because you feel stronger and weaker all at the same time. You feel excited and at the same time terrified. The truth is, you don't know what you feel. Isn't that right, Pete? Harry, no! Harry drops Mary Jane. In slow motion, we see Spider-Man dive after her. Instantly, Hobgoblin throws a pumpkin bomb down towards Peter. Using his spider sense, Spider-Man dodges it, catches it with a web, and flings it back at Hobgoblin without looking. The bomb connects with his glider and blows it up. Harry Osborn begins the descent to his death. Still in slow motion, Spider-Man is close to MJ and whips out two webs, one connecting to the bridge and the other reaching for MJ. The web isn't a perfect shot and manages to connect to Mary Jane's lower leg. The web goes taut and MJ's body is violently snapped downwards. She goes limp. Spider-Man gets to a surface where he can pull her up and is horrified to see that she's not moving. Mary Jane Watson is dead. That's right, I'm doing the Gwen Stacy death with Mary Jane. This trilogy was always about the melodramatic love triangle between Peter, MJ, and Harry. Ending it in complete tragedy is the right way to go. We got Harry's babyface turn and death in the movie, yes, but it felt cheap because they never fully committed to him going bad, and we never got to see the struggle that was evident at the end of Spider-Man 2. Having Harry struggle with his inner demons and ultimately losing is the most interesting outcome in my opinion, and he takes Mary Jane down with him. Peter is all that's left and at the lowest point in his life. This is the way to end their story, but fear not, there's more. Peter weeps hysterically at the death of MJ as we dissolve into the ending narration. Spider-Man swings over a New York City that is recovering from a goblin attack that killed several people. Revenge is like a poison. It can take you over. Before you know it, turn us into something ugly. I chose revenge over responsibility, and because of that, several people died, including the woman I love. I used to think this was my gift, my curse. Who am I?
These days, I'm not so sure. As in the film, we get a funeral scene with many people leaving Peter alone at Mary Jane's grave. He opens his hand to look at the ring he gave her, then somberly puts it away. Close by, he sees a woman weeping. Peter looks at the headstone, and it reads, George Stacy. Captain Stacy was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. He was a good man. And a better father.
Gwen Stacy turns around and locks eyes with Peter Parker. For some strange reason that he can't comprehend, we see a slight glimpse of peace enter Peter's eyes. And that's it! I know I went pretty far with a few ideas, but I think a shock ending like this could have made this movie something special, and as I said, it just feels like the correct end to this melodramatic love triangle. Taking Venom out made some room for Harry's descent, but honestly, even without the symbiote, this movie had a lot going on. Does it all work perfectly? Maybe not, but trying to maintain some of the bigger plot lines and adding something more interesting with the three leads could have made for a more focused and character-appropriate narrative. The themes of revenge and forgiveness are the most prominent. Peter eventually forgave Sandman, but in the end, Harry couldn't forgive Peter or maybe even himself for feeling those temptations. Revenge is a theme that was front and center in Spider-Man's origin, so I know this might seem like a bit of a retread, but it was a big part of Spider-Man 3, so I wanted to make sure we carried that over. Mary Jane still gets some development, but admittedly, it's tough to know what to do with her when she's been portrayed a certain way in the first two movies. We can't just make her a gun-toting badass or something, and Dunst's version of the character isn't much like the quick-witted, charismatic firecracker from the comics. So sticking with some of what they gave her in the film and piling on guilt about Harry could add some depth. From here, they could have made a whole new trilogy with new characters surrounding Peter as he attempts to rebuild his life. The big question going forward is how can Peter atone for the sins he thinks he committed here? The emotional focus could be on the slow development of Peter and Gwen's relationship, while the villain arc could actually go to Venom and the Black Suit Saga. Eddie Brock's already been introduced, and that's 2 of your 3 films right there. Maybe they could have actually had Vulture and or Lizard in there somewhere too. Hell, a third trilogy could have followed what happened to Peter's parents and how that comes back around to affect him. A 4th trilogy could have brought in the Jackal, Kane, and Ben Reilly for the Clone Saga. A 5th trilogy could have brought in Miles Morales and the Spider-Verse. I'm sorry. I'm getting carried away here. The point is, this particular series had the legs to go much further. It's a shame that it ended with 3 movies, but hey, I don't see many people complaining about Tom Holland and Into the Spider-Verse, so maybe things worked out for the best. Anyway, leave suggestions below on how you would fix Spider-Man 3, and make sure to check out the FanScription podcast where I go deeper into my creative choices on this episode. Thanks for watching, webheads. Excelsior!